What if I told you that beneath your feet right now exists the most sophisticated communication network on Earth? Not fiber optic cables, not 5-edge towers, but something that's been operating for 400 million years. Trees have been running their own version of the internet this entire time, and we're only just discovering how incredibly advanced it really is. While you're scrolling through social media, trees are literally sharing resources, sending warnings, and even playing favorites with their relatives through an underground web that would make Silicon Valley engineers weep with envy. This network has survived 4 mass extinction events, and it might just hold the key to saving our planet from the climate crisis we've created. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. We've been systematically destroying this natural internet without even knowing it existed. Every time we clear-cut a forest, we're essentially unplugging millions of years of evolutionary genius. And the consequences? They're more terrifying than you might imagine. Back in 1885, a German botanist named Albert Bernhard Frank made a discovery so outrageous that his fellow scientists basically laughed him out of every academic conference he attended. Frank claimed that plant roots and soil fungi weren't just neighbors, they were business partners, actively working together in ways that defied everything science understood about how plants survived. The scientific community thought Frank had lost his mind. How could plants, which everyone knew were simple, passive organisms, be sophisticated enough to form partnerships? It went against everything they believed about nature being a brutal competition where only the strongest survived. But Frank wasn't crazy. He was just 140 years ahead of his time. Modern science has proven that not only was he right, but he was describing something far more incredible than even he imagined. Today, we know that roughly 90% of all terrestrial plants are connected to what scientists call mycorrhizal networks, essentially fungal internet cables that link plants across entire landscapes. These aren't just random connections either. We're talking about sophisticated partnerships that involve 2 main types of fungal networks. The first type, called arbuscular mycorrhiza, gets its name from the Latin word for little tree because these fungi actually penetrate deep into plant root cells and form tiny tree-like structures inside them. It's like having microscopic antennas installed directly into your nervous system. But that wasn't the whole story. The second type, ectomycorrhizal fungi, takes a completely different approach. Instead of breaking into root cells, these fungi wrap around the outside of roots like a living sheath and slip between plant cells to create their own communication highways. These particular fungi tend to partner with the most economically valuable trees, the ones we harvest for timber. Here's where it gets absolutely wild. These fungal networks don't just exist. They actively trade resources like some kind of biological stock market. The fungi scout out water and essential nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen from the soil, then deliver them directly to their plant partners. In exchange, the plants hand over between 4 and 20% of all the sugars they produce through photosynthesis. This isn't just cooperation. It's the backbone of every forest on Earth. Without this partnership, life on land as we know it might never have evolved at all. But what scientists discovered next would completely revolutionize our understanding of how forests actually work. In the early 1980s, a group of researchers decided to test whether trees could actually share resources with each other. They planted pine trees side by side in a laboratory box, then introduced mycorrhizal fungi to connect their roots underground. Then they did something brilliant. They tagged one tree's sugars with radioactive carbon by sealing it in a box with radioactive carbon dioxide. The tree absorbed the radioactive carbon and converted it into radioactive sugars through photosynthesis. The scientists then placed photographic film over the root box, hoping to track whether these radioactive particles would travel from one tree to another, or if they'd travel at all. When they developed that film, they saw something that should have been impossible according to everything science thought it knew about trees. The radioactive particles had traveled in a clear path through the mycorrhizal fungal network from one tree to the other. Trees weren't just connected. They were actively sharing their food. This discovery created what scientists call an evolutionary paradox. For centuries, we understood that trees evolved through brutal competition. They grow tall to hoard sunlight, spread their roots wide to monopolize water, and the losers simply don't survive. If trees were actually sharing resources, it meant scientists had to completely rethink how forest evolution worked. This paradox is what captured the imagination of researcher Suzanne Simard, who designed an experiment that would change forestry forever. She wanted to know if different tree species, trees that supposedly compete with each other, would actually share resources through fungal networks. Simard planted Douglas fir, paper birch, and cedar seedlings together in groups of 3. She labeled the birch with radioactive carbon-14 and the fir with stable carbon-13, so she could track whether resources flowed in both directions between the species. The cedar acted as her control group because it forms a different type of mycorrhizal network that can't connect with fir or birch. Then she covered the fir trees with shade tents, dramatically reducing their ability to photosynthesize. If the trees were truly connected and cooperating, the surplus sugars from the healthy birch should flow to help the struggling fir trees. And what she found was absolutely revolutionary. Not only did the birch and fir share resources, but the more shade stress the fir experienced, the more carbon-14 it received from the birch. The cedar, which couldn't connect to the fungal network, received nothing. Further experiments revealed that these species share nitrogen, trade resources in both directions depending on seasonal conditions, and exist in what scientists call an alternating feedback system. They take turns helping each other when the other species needs it most. But resource sharing was just the beginning. Scientists soon discovered that trees use their fungal networks as an early warning system that puts our emergency broadcast systems to shame. When researchers infested tomato plants with leaf-chewing caterpillars, something incredible happened. Healthy neighboring plants connected through fungal networks activated 4 defense-related genes within just 6 hours. These plants hadn't been touched by a single caterpillar, but they knew trouble was coming, and they were preparing for war. The plants that had time to produce defensive enzymes fared dramatically better when the caterpillars eventually reached them, and the pests that tried to munch on these prepared plants didn't grow as large or cause as much damage. Even more mind-blowing is the evidence that trees can recognize their own relatives through fungal networks. They can identify which trees share their genetics and direct more resources toward those family members. It's like trees have their own version of social media, complete with family connections and resource sharing based on relationships. This completely shattered the traditional view of forests as collections of competing individuals. Instead, scientists realized they were looking at cooperative networks where trees live in harmony, sharing resources and information for mutual survival. But this cooperation isn't purely selfless. It's actually brilliant evolutionary strategy. When neighboring trees perish, gaps open in the protective forest canopy. Sure, the remaining trees get more sunlight and can photosynthesize more, but they also become incredibly vulnerable. More intense sunshine reaches the delicate forest floor, heating and drying out the cool, damp microclimate that forest trees desperately need to survive. Winds can penetrate the forest more easily, and without neighboring tree crowns to provide stability, the chance of being uprooted increases dramatically. Trees live longer and reproduce more successfully in healthy, stable forests, which is exactly why they've evolved to help their neighbors survive. Understanding this network revealed something that completely changed how scientists think about forest management. The biggest, oldest trees, what researchers call mother trees, function as the central hubs of these underground fungal networks. These ancient giants are the most connected nodes in the forest's internet, sometimes linked to hundreds of other trees simultaneously. Mother trees share their excess carbon and nitrogen through mycorrhizal networks with understory seedlings, dramatically increasing their survival rate. They're like biological servers, maintaining the network infrastructure that keeps entire forest communities alive and thriving. But here's the problem that's been hiding in plain sight. Humans have become incredibly efficient at destroying exactly the trees that forests need most. We clear-cut entire areas, or specifically target the biggest, oldest trees, because they're the most economically valuable. Every time we remove these mother trees, we're essentially unplugging the central servers of the forest's internet. When too many mother trees get logged, the network starts to collapse. Disease begins spreading more easily because the early warning system breaks down. Insect outbreaks become more devastating because trees can't coordinate their defenses. The entire forest community starts to decline, creating a cascade of ecological destruction that can take decades or centuries to recover from. The logging industry has been accidentally conducting a massive experiment in network destruction, and the results are exactly what you'd expect when you systematically remove the most critical infrastructure components from any complex system. The forest equivalent of taking down major internet servers and wondering why everything stops working properly. But this research isn't just revealing the problem. It's pointing towards solutions that could revolutionize how we manage forests and fight climate change. Scientists now understand that sustainable logging practices need to preserve these fungal networks by retaining mother trees as anchor points for forest resilience. When smaller trees are harvested while leaving enough hub trees and mother trees intact, the network continues functioning. Communication flows can continue, resource trading carries on, and the forest maintains its ability to resist stress and recover from disturbances. Mother trees also serve as seed sources for forest regeneration. Their offspring sprout nearby and can immediately plug into the established mycorrhizal network, receiving resources from their extended community that dramatically boost their chances of survival. It's like being born into a family with established wealth and connections. The advantages are immediate and significant. Research has shown that retaining old trees and their extensive networks reduces carbon loss from ecosystems both above and below ground. Connected forests are better able to cope with climate change, showing greater productivity, health, and diversity compared to fragmented or clear-cut areas. This revelation is sparking a revolution in forest management practices. Instead of viewing forests as collections of individual timber resources, scientists and foresters are starting to understand them as interconnected superorganisms that need their network infrastructure preserved to function properly. The implications extend far beyond forestry. Researchers are investigating how these same fungal networks could revolutionize agriculture. Most staple food crops naturally form relationships with mycorrhizal fungi when soil conditions allow the fungi to flourish. These biological partnerships could provide crops with nitrogen and phosphorus naturally, reducing farmers' reliance on synthetic fertilizers that cause massive environmental damage. It could be a natural, scalable solution to some of agriculture's biggest environmental problems. Instead of dumping chemicals into soil and watching them run off into waterways, we could work with biological systems that have been perfecting resource distribution for hundreds of millions of years. The more we learn about these networks, the more we realize how much we've underestimated the intelligence and interconnectedness of natural systems. Trees aren't passive, individual organisms competing for resources. They're members of sophisticated communities that share information, resources, and even show preferential care for family members. This underground internet has been operating beneath our feet for 400 million years, surviving mass extinction events and creating the stable conditions that made human civilization possible. It's been quietly managing carbon cycles, nutrient distribution, and ecosystem resilience, while we've been busy trying to recreate similar functions with technology. The choice we face now is whether we'll continue accidentally destroying this natural internet through ignorant logging practices, or whether we'll learn to work with these networks to create more resilient forests and agricultural systems. The trees have been trying to teach us about sustainable network design for millions of years. We're finally starting to listen. Understanding the secret language of trees isn't just about satisfying scientific curiosity. It's about recognizing that the solutions to our biggest environmental challenges might already exist in the natural systems we've been systematically dismantling. The question is whether we're smart enough to learn from 400 million years of successful networking before it's too late. That's a wrap on today's wild journey. But here at the Zoo-phoria show, we're just getting started exploring nature's most incredible stories. Subscribe if you want to keep discovering the shocking, hilarious, and downright unbelievable truths about the animals sharing our planet. Your next favorite animal fact is just one click away.